Okay. Right. So I'm going to start chapter 6 today on photosynthesis. Oh, I gotta close that window too. All right, there we go. So the next two chapters are going to be very closely related. That's photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Photosynthesis is using light energy and converting that into chemical energy, and oxygen is also produced. And then in respiration, you have the carbohydrates that are made during photosynthesis and the oxygen that's made during photosynthesis used to create energy. And so, it's going really great. That's funny. Right. And so there's going to be a lot of kind of overlapping between these two chapters. I will warn you that I believe these are probably the two most difficult chapters in biology, period. So a lot of it is going to be like really high detail about the biochemical reactions that occur during photosynthesis, but I will try to take time out to kind of zoom out and keep in mind like the big picture and how everything is related, because that is more important than actually memorizing all of the steps of each of these biochemical cycles that I'm going to talk about. So again, just trying to keep everything in big picture. So all organisms use energy to carry out the functions of life, but where does this energy come from? Either directly or indirectly, almost all of the energy in living systems comes from the sun. Energy from the sun enters living systems. I don't know what that means. That must be a typo. One plants, algae, some use. That must be once. Let me change that because that don't make no sense. Yeah, that's better. So basically you have photosynthetic compounds, which are photosynthetic organisms that are going to capture the energy that's from the sunlight, and they're going to convert that light energy into chemical energy in the form of organic compounds. And that overall is the main idea of photosynthesis. Now, I want you to keep in mind that photosynthesis is only converting light energy into chemical energy. That chemical energy is going to be in the form of organic compounds. That does not, however, actually create energy for organisms to use. That process is respiration, which is why it's related. So plants are going to have to use both photosynthesis to create food and respiration to get the energy out of that food. So how do organisms get energy? They're usually classified by how they obtain energy. So we can break down all organisms into two groups based on energy. What do you call that? What's the noun of obtaining? Anyway, the autotrophs are going to use energy from the sun or chemical bonds in organic compounds to make organic compounds. So you've got two kinds of autotrophs. So using energy from the sun, that's photosynthesis, which from the sun, that's where you get photo, that means light. Or if it's inorganic compounds, that process is called chemosynthesis. So the chemo indicates that they're getting, they're making organic compounds from inorganic compounds. Most autotrophs use photosynthesis. I forget what trough means. I looked it up once. Give me a minute, I'm Googling. Troph meaning. Okay, you don't want to tell me? I typed it in wrong. Okay. Troph is a combining form used like a prefix meaning nourishment. Okay. So basically nourishment. And again, I always told you in biology, we break down the vocab. So auto means self, troph, nourishment. If you can read that, nourishment. And then all of the other organisms on Earth are called heterotrophs, which have to get energy from food. Now, whether they actually ingest or eat that food or they absorb it directly. But again, nourishment and hetero means different or other. So they don't make the nourishment themselves. They get their nourishment from something else. Okay, so this is two ways to classify organisms based on how they get energy. So here's what I mean about these two processes being highly related. We refer to them as biochemical cycles because obviously it's a cycle and it involves both biology and chemicals. So biochemical cycles. So in this process, we're going to look at how light energy is used during photosynthesis by the autotrophs. And in this process, they're going to create organic compounds and oxygen. Organic compounds and oxygen are going to be used by autotrophs and heterotrophs during cellular respiration. This process makes energy for life processes. And this process is going to produce carbon dioxide and water, which is then will be used again by photosynthesis. And so that's how they're related. Sometimes it's also called a biochemical pathway, a biochemical cycle. It's a series of reactions where the products of the first reaction is used as the reactants in the next. So it can either be a cycle like this, or it can actually be a pathway, which is like several reactions that are linked together, not necessarily in a cycle. But in general, nature likes to recycle things. And so if it can, it will. So again, you've got the products of photosynthesis being organic compounds and oxygen being used as reactants in cellular respiration. Products of cellular respiration, CO2 and water, those are the reactants for photosynthesis. So it kind of goes back and forth. Okay, I said that already. Don't need to say that again. Now, photosynthesis has two stages. The first stage, hey, I clicked on it, go. Okay. The first stage involves what are called the light reactions. This is where light energy is converted into chemical energy. The chemical energy is going to be temporarily stored in two molecules, ATP, which we know already, and a new molecule called NADPH. In the second phase or stage, either way, so you can use either phases or stages, you have the Calvin cycle. Now, sometimes this is referred to as the light independent reactions, and these sometimes are called the light dependent reactions. Because obviously, if light is converted to chemical energy, you kind of need light, right? So the first part of photosynthesis depends on there being light. Now, the Calvin cycle is the second part, which is where you form organic compounds from CO2. And you do that using the energy from the compounds that you made in the first part of photosynthesis, ATP and NADPH. In some older textbooks, you might see this called the dark reactions. I do not like that term because the Calvin cycle does not need to be in the dark. It can be in either the light or the dark. It doesn't matter, which is why either the Calvin cycle, or if you want to be like more descriptive, the light independent reactions is a better name for it, because they don't depend on there being light presence, which means it can be light, no light, meh, who cares? The Calvin cycle doesn't matter. It doesn't depend on there being light present. So for this part, you've got light converted to chemical energy. So light energy to chemical energy. That chemical energy is ATP and NADPH. The second part, you're going to take CO2 using the energy that you made, and you're going to make organic compounds. Okay. Now, there's going to be a lot of other compounds that are going to be involved in both of these processes, and you're going to see just exactly how connected all of this is. So I don't think I'm going to get directly into the light reactions yet today. I think I'll save that for tomorrow because it's quite detailed. But and I also have to talk about the chloroplast structure and all that kind of stuff. But what I do want to mention is when we study the light reactions, you're going to see compounds that you're like, maybe you think, well, where did that come from? The key thing to remember is that like these are also biochemical cycles between stage 1 and stage 2. So the things that we need as reactants for stage 1, they were produced during the Calvin cycle, the second part. And the things that we produce during the light reactions, they're going to go to the Calvin cycle to be used. And so it's the same like photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Everything made in the light reactions, it's used in the Calvin cycle. Everything made in the Calvin cycle goes back to the light reactions to keep those going. And it makes more sense when I start talking about detail, but I just want to let you know, there's going to be a lot of things coming into play, and just understand that as we learn all the details of each of these parts, it will make sense when you put it all together. It's like a puzzle, you know, like when you put a puzzle together, you've got like 500 random pieces that don't seem to really fit together. But slowly, as you start putting it together, you see the overall picture of what you're trying to form. That's kind of like learning photosynthesis. So I just wanted to warn you about that. Okay, so then we have to talk about what organelle is involved in photosynthesis. Why is its structure so important when it comes to the actual process of photosynthesis and the properties of light? So the first stage of photosynthesis is the light reactions. This occurs inside the chloroplast, inside the thylakoids, where you have these flattened sacs. If you remember all the way back to chapter 4, when we looked at a chloroplast, first thing that I want to point out, we have a double membrane. And that comes from the endosymbiosis theory about how chloroplasts used to be a prokaryote and then were swallowed or invaded a eukaryotic cell, and that's how it got an extra membrane around it. And then you look at the inside structure. I should have put that outer membrane in my membrane. The inside structure, you've got thylakoids. You have stacks of them. Remember, the thylakoids are like, I call them pancakes. I have former students that call them Mentos, whatever you prefer. And then one stack is called a granum. Now, this comes from Latin. In Latin, a singular ends with and a plural ends with a. So this is singular, plural. So grana are multiple stacks, or a granum is a singular stack of thylakoids. Now, outside the thylakoids, you have a solution called the stroma. This is going to be really, really reflective of how photosynthesis works, because you've got one set of reactions that occurs in the membrane of the thylakoids, and a second set of reactions that are going to occur outside of the thylakoids in the stroma, but still within the confines or the boundaries of this organelle. And that's why the structure is so important. And I guarantee you, you will have a question about that sooner or later, about why the structure of the chloroplast is so important. But I'll try to make sure to talk about that again when we actually look at the reactions. So the thylakoid is just one of these pancakes. right? And then they are formed in stacks called grana. Again, that's plural. And the solution surrounding all of that is called the stroma. Okay, that's the internal structure of a chloroplast. Now here, I found online, I've got the diagram, like a drawn diagram on the right-hand side, but then you actually have a transmission electron micrograph, that's the TEM. That's an actual picture of a chloroplast. So each of these darker areas, that is a granum. And you can see individual stacks or individual thylakoids here. And then you've got these membranes which connect one granum to another granum. Okay, and then all the space in between is the stroma. And this is what's called an SEM, a scanning electron micrograph. I think I've mentioned these two types of microscope before. A transmission electron microscope, which is this picture, you get high detail, but not this kind of 3D look to it. Because in this picture, you use electrons instead of like the microscopes we have at school, they use light. But these are electron microscopes, which is what the E stands for. And transmission electron microscope, it shoots electrons through a thinly sliced sample, so you get an internal structure. But a scanning electron microscope, I've actually used one of these in university. It took 2 people to operate it, or 2 students at least, maybe one proper scientist that can do it by themselves. But it's a giant microscope that's probably like 2 meters tall, and there's like a whole big desk unit that goes with it, and there's like a computer and stuff like that. But this it still uses electrons. That's why it's an EM, an electron microscope. But instead of shooting electrons through the sample, you actually coat the sample in gold, and then electrons are going to hit the surface and bounce off. And that's why you get this kind of really cool 3D effect. These pictures are not going to be taken in color. So anytime you see scanning electron micrographs, a picture of a scanning electron microscope image, they are colored artificially. But anyway, you can see this is the outside of the chloroplast, and you can even see the double membrane here. And then this is looks like a, yeah, this is a granum here, granum there, and the stroma. So it's a lot messier actually looking than the transmission electron microscope. Okay, and then I think I got 2 more things to talk about. No, this is light and pigments. Yeah, 2 more things, light and pigments. We already discussed before in chemistry the electromagnetic spectrum. So all forms of electromagnetic radiation, including light energy, is on the spectrum. They all travel at the speed of light. At this end, you have the long wavelength, low frequency radiation. So you can see your radio and TV down here. You've got your visible light, which is this tiny little slice right there. And of course, remember, excuse me, Roy G. Biv, we're going backwards this time. Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, the colors of the rainbow. And as you increase in frequency, I don't know why they have it. I would have flipped this around so that you've got low frequency on the left and high frequency on the right, but anyway. You've got X-rays and finally gamma rays at the top. So the wavelength and frequency of energy that we're talking about for photosynthesis is in this range. So you see anywhere from 400 to 700 nanometers for a wavelength. This is what's called the visible spectrum, because it's the only one that we can see. And of course, we measure light in wavelengths. Different wavelengths of light have different colors, and that's how we see color. Because, for example, my jacket that I'm wearing is white, and white is a combination of all 7 colors. So that means that the pigment that's in my jacket contains pigment that reflects all visible wavelengths of light, which means you've got all 7 colors being reflected off of my jacket into your eyeballs, and that's why it looks white. If you have something that's black, like my phone screen or whatever, that means that it contains the pigments that absorb all of these wavelengths of light. And so there is no wavelength of light that is going back to your eye, which is why it appears black. Now I've mentioned the word pigment. A pigment is any molecule that absorbs light. Now, depending on what the pigment is, it will reflect different wavelengths of light. Therefore, you see different colors. If you have, let's try to clean this up. Let's say you've got a blue pigment, since I'm doing blue pen, that means that the pigment that's making up these markings right here absorbs all of the wavelengths of light except the blue, which looks like it's somewhere in the 470, 80 nanometer territory. And it's absorbing everything else and only reflecting that wavelength, which is why we see blue. If I change to red, then the pigments here are absorbing all of this and only reflecting around 700 nanometers of light, which is why it appears red. Yellow, same thing. If you're in the yellow category, you're around 600 nanometers. So only 600 nanometer-ish, of course, we're talking about a range, but around 600 nanometers, that's being reflected back at you and everything else is being absorbed. So what kind of pigments do we have in chloroplasts? Well, the most obvious one, we have chlorophyll, but there are 2 types of chlorophyll. There's type A and type B. And I've shown you here the structure of them. You don't have to remember the structure, but you can just kind of look and compare the 2. Even just looking at here, you've got a magnesium atom connected to 4 nitrogen. Same thing here. You got a methyl group there. There's a double bond O. That's all the same. Oh, look, there's a difference here, and here. Everything else looks the same. Even the double bonds look all the same. Yeah. Everything else exactly the same. So that's the only difference between chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B. Now, chlorophyll A absorbs more red and less blue light. Chlorophyll B absorbs more blue and less red. Now, the way that I remember the difference, chlorophyll B, blue. So just remember that B absorbs more blue. So together, they're going to absorb a lot of red and a lot of blue, which are on opposite ends of that spectrum. So again, we got red. I don't have yellow, but orange, yellow, green, blue, and then I'll just do indigo violet. So you've got chlorophyll A, which absorbs that end. Chlorophyll B absorbs that end. And then guess which one neither one of them absorb, which is reflected. Da-da-da, green. So this is why plants appear green, because of chlorophyll. It's the only range of wavelength of light that chlorophyll reflects. Okay, both reflect green light. Here we go. So here we've got the electromagnetic spectrum down here. Again, I guess because we go in wavelength and 400 is less than 700, but you've got chlorophyll A, which absorbs more, yeah, sorry, because it's I'm looking at the color of the line in the graph, and I'm like, wait, that's blue. That's not, no, here, we're down here in the red range. So chlorophyll A, the peak here is higher than down here. So it does absorb blue and red, but more red than blue. And then chlorophyll B absorbs, again, both, but different wavelengths. You see that? So chlorophyll A absorbs more of like the violet color down here. Chlorophyll B absorbs more of the blue color. Chlorophyll B absorbs more of the oranges, and chlorophyll A more of the red, the dark red. But altogether, you see where it does not absorb light is in the green area, and that's why plants appear green. Now we also have carotenoids. Now carotenoids, along with chlorophyll B, are called accessory pigments because they are an accessory. Chlorophyll A is the main pigment in plants, but chlorophyll B and the carotenoids are accessories. So they help to absorb more wavelengths of light. Now, carotenoids are pigments that are going to appear yellow, orange, and brown because they're going to reflect those colors. And here I've got the picture of why we've got like why carrots are orange, because they reflect orange. They contain something called beta carotene, which comes from carotenoid, and it absorbs all the blues and greens and only the high wavelength red, but it reflects orange, which is why it appears orange. Then you've got lemons and bananas, of course, that appear yellow. So those are going to have carotenoids that absorb these colors and reflect yellow. But altogether, they're basically there to absorb as much of this entire spectrum as it can, because the more wavelengths of light that the pigments absorb, then the more energy it can get from that. Hold on a second. Oh, let me just double check. Yeah, I do not want to get into this today because then that's going to start talking about the light reactions. I want to do that